Hello, folks, and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig. Some voices don't simply tell a story, they illuminate a lifetime of memory, scholarship, and moral courage. Today, we are honored to welcome Grace Feuerverger, Professor Emerita of Education and Ethnography at the University of Toronto, award winning author, and a scholar whose life work has explored how identity, language, culture, and history shape the human spirit. Grace is the author of the acclaimed Oasis of Dreams, Teaching and Learning Peace in a Jewish Palestinian Village in Israel, Teaching, Learning, and Other Miracles. And her newest and deeply personal book is called Winter Light, the Memoir of a Child of Holocaust Survivors. In Winter Light, she traces an inner journey from the inherited darkness that can cling to a child of survivors, Holocaust survivors, toward a life built with love, meaning, and joy. Kirkus Reviews calls her search for a place of inner solace profoundly inspiring, praising the book's poetically stirring prose and its clear meditation on how trauma is transmitted across generations. A powerful story conveyed with deep humanity and insight. What makes Winter Light so unforgettable is its movement across borders, emotional and geographic. As historian Adam Hochschild writes, quote, with her parents, survival of the Holocaust as a shadow in the background, Grace's memoir takes us into the sunlight, beginning with her first crossing into another culture, French speaking Canadian, and unfolding into a life of language, crossings, and human connection, including the way she opened that wider world for her students. Others describe the book as lyrical, as brave, as wise, and deeply humanizing. A memoir that shows the long shadow of war while honoring how every survivor's family's experience is profoundly, essentially different. In this conversation, we'll explore Grace's life between worlds, scholarship and memoir, pain and healing, the legacy of the Holocaust, and the possibility of peace, and what it means to keep walking toward light even when history leaves frost on the window. Winter Light is about a sequence of serendipitous rescues, an emotional rags to riches story. Vivid and lyrical, Winter Light is a deeply moving memoir dedicated to all who are coming from places of trauma. It is about the vast unknown territory of the human heart in spite of the ghosts that still haunt. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Grace Feuerverger. How are you, Grace?
Very good. And thank you so much for those words. And I'm delighted to be on your program. Very much.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you here. We have a mutual friend in Caroline Topperman,
Yes.
and
Yes.
she's a very, very fine human being. I've interviewed her,
Lovely.
and
She's lovely.
if you're friends with her, then I'm good with that. Uh,
Yeah.
I was deeply taken in my research about your book, about your family, about the journey that you have been on, and in some ways, even more so, your parents' journey. And
Yeah.
and I want to start this interview talking about your parents and what they went through in Holocaust Europe. Um, let's begin with who your parent. Tell us your parents' names.
Well, my father, his name is Edek. My mother is Esther. Um, I don't mention their names in the book for various reasons,
Yes.
as you may know. Uh, but of course, I explain why in the book. Uh, I had a very treacherous childhood. Of course, that's largely due to the Holocaust and the trauma that my parents dealt with. But there was a second, it's sort of like a double whammy in a sense, because, and it's good, I should say this at the outset. My mother had emotional issues. I did not know this as a child, obviously, but my mother had emotional difficulties, call it illness, even before the war. And this was something I only found out about many years later, like when I was an adult in my late 20s. And so that colored my childhood even more deeply, because this story isn't just a story about trauma from the Holocaust. it's a really intertwined story about my mother, who was a teenager at the time of the deportation, who already had emotional issues which were not addressed. I mean, my parents came from poverty in Poland, a town in Poland. And the problem is there was no money, there was no educational experiences that they had, very little. Most Holocaust memoirs, actually, if that have been written, have been published, come from families that had a certain level of a certain comfort level, a certain educational level, a certain socioeconomic level. And that's what people, if they read Holocaust memoirs, that's what people read. And that's kind of the story that people know if they do. What's interesting in my case is that my memoir seems to be, because it is about being a child of survivors, so it's considered a second generation Holocaust memoir. And that's, by the way, my publisher was so interested in it because she herself said to me, this is the first time I see a Holocaust memoir that isn't about families that had something to fall back on after the war. Now, they had devastating losses. They lost everything. However, they had memories, they had understandings of how to rebuild, in a sense. Not to say they didn't have problems, but my parents, after they did survive the concentration camps, and my father, by the way, I should say it, he saved my mother's life in the concentration camp.
Yeah. So
he was an amazing man.
I want to piece the story together,
Yeah.
like a love story almost, because
it is.
As you address it, it is a love story.
Yeah.
They were both from Częstochowa,
Poland, where the Black Madonna Shrine is. It's a Polish Catholic pilgrimage area. They always had to be very careful, they told me, especially during Easter, because it was so easy for a pogrom to break up.
They were privy later on to a pogrom.
Yes.
I think it was in Kiev. And that was then that they left Europe. But before we get there, so your mother, as you described her, was a beautiful woman.
Yes, she was very
black hair.
My father, absolutely dark. She looked. What's interesting about my mother? She was much dark. I mean, dark, very dark eyes, dark hair. When I would walk as a child with her to the grocery store or wherever in Montreal, we lived in a French-Canadian neighborhood, but there were a lot of immigrants as well. We were the only Jewish family in the couple of streets where we lived. However, women would come up to my mother speaking either in Greek or Turkish, thinking that she was either Greek or Turkish, because that's what she looked like. She was a very, very beautiful.
Your father looked like a Pole. He looked like a Polish guy, right?
Yeah, my father looked exactly like, he could have passed for Polish.
Yes.
He could have easily gotten papers, but they were already engaged to be married before the deportation. So my father was not about to just let my mother go. He fell in love with her. Absolutely. There's a whole story about that in the book where, because he was, came from a poor family, his father died at a very young age, in his late 40s. And my father was the youngest in the family. There were 8 siblings. And, but he was a boy. Most of them were girls. So he had to go out and work at a very young age. Anyway, they wanted, the Chatron had a girl ready for him who came from a bit of money, but he had already fallen in love with my mother.
In a big way.
But he wanted so much to please his mother because his father had just passed away. And it was just, they were in dire straits. They were totally. So he actually left my mother to become engaged to this other girl. However, he couldn't go through with it.
Yeah,
and
Right.
Really, he had to break off and that was a big deal because it had to do with a rabbi having to annul the engagement, etc. But my father, and that is very connected to, he saved my mother's life in concentration camp, and literally, he became friendly. This is also interesting. He became friendly with a guard, a German guard, in the concentration camp, and he always said that if it hadn't been for the war, they could have been good friends. They had amazing conversations in quiet moments when the Oberkommandant was not around, and so on. So this guard gave him a little extra food, and he sort of looked out for my mother, who was, of course, on the other side, the women's section. You know how huge these camps were. This was a forced labor camp right outside of their city.
It was a munitions camp, right?
It was Hasag. It was it was an munitions factory.
Right, because your father was a welder. He was a welder.
Yeah, he knew how to weld, and he wasn't really necessarily a real welder, but he learned fast. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And that's how he had a chance to survive. And of course, this guard kind of looked out for my mother and allowed my parents to meet every so often at night. And then towards the end of they didn't know it was the end, close to the end of the war. Suddenly the guard rushes over to my father and says, I feel so terrible about this, but your mother has now been selected to put in the line to go to the death camp Treblinka. Because, at that point they didn't, well, the Germans knew it, the Nazis knew it, the Soviet army was close, and they should have retreated at that point. However, they wanted to get as many Jews as possible to the death camp. So anyway, my mother was in the line, and my father, of course, said, just tell me where she is. The guard showed him, and in the midst of all of this chaos, the guards with their boots and the dogs and shooting and so on.
All the noise.
My father literally walked. He said, I didn't even run. I walked to the line. I grabbed your mother out of the line by her hair.
By her hair, yes.
Because she had thick hair, and of course it was a forced labor camp, so they had hair, and grabbed her out, and he said, I didn't care if I lived or died. I just wanted to be with her. And so he grabbed her out and he said, and you know what? They didn't shoot. Yeah. He said, I don't know, maybe they just didn't notice or they didn't care for a moment. Whatever it was, we rushed back to the guard, and he hit us. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly there was this incredible bombing. He said there was a huge din. Well, it was the Soviet army approaching. And the guard said to my father, we have to get out of here. We're running out of here. The Soviets are on their way. They're very close. They're a few miles away. But you will be okay. He said, you will be liberated by them. But the interesting thing is, and my father told me this story, I was quite young at the time. He said, I was yelling over all of the noise, what is your name? Maybe we can get together after the war. But the guard didn't hear him. And in any case, the Soviets came in and shot them all. Some of them, I don't think any of them really escaped. And there you are. The Soviets offered them food and clothing. But to this day, or to the day my father passed away, he said, it's a shame that we didn't. But he said, look, he used it as a lesson. He probably would have made a great teacher, because he said, you have to judge people individually. He said this was a good man who had been somehow forced. He was told, the guard told him he was forced into this situation. He said he himself, this particular guard, did not, I don't think, kill anyone at all. But in any case, He said, you have to judge people individually. I mean, my father had a sense of social justice before that word became fashionable, so to speak. And he was a bright light in my life. I am very
The
fortunate.
guard left your father a silver cigarette.
Thank you for reminding me.
Do
That's
you still
right.
have that?
I don't.
You don't have one.
Which is such a shame. It was a silver, lovely cigarette case. It got a little beat up during the war, and I brought it into class actually once. The kids didn't even understand what this was. All they saw was this ugly, beat up looking silver case, and yet it was so imbued with emotional meaning for me. No, that case got lost in a move, and
It's too bad.
well, who knows? Maybe it's up there with them now.
So Grace, so your parents, they leave the labor camp and they go back to Częstochowa
Right.
and they knock on the apartment, where
Yeah,
a little apartment where they had lived prior.
that's right.
And this guy answers with a big bottle of vodka and he starts to yell at them that he's going to kill them, right?
Yeah, yeah. He said, don't even think of coming
This
near
is
this
mine.
place again.
Yes,
I will kill you if you come back. This is where I live, and this is where I will stay.
it is mine now. Yes.
It is mine. And of course, that was their place, but it had been once they were put into the ghetto. Of course, these apartments, the Jewish apartments, were given to other people, to non-Jews.
And what's phenomenal, maybe you could call it a miracle even, is that your mom became pregnant, right?
And do the math. My brother, my parents were liberated in January of 1945. My brother was born in July of
Okay.
1945.
Yeah.
So do the math, Yeah, because of this guard who allowed them to be together. Every
Conjugally. Yes.
Sorry?
Conjugally, they were
Yeah,
together.
yeah, yes, exactly. It's sort of like weird, like it's a prison
Yeah,
conjugal.
right, right.
Right,
And I
right.
think one of the compelling things about your story is that it is so mixed with different cultures and different religions and different peoples. I mean, to the extent that your mother gave birth to your brother in a monastery.
That's right.
And
At the Yasna Gora, the big one, the Black Madonna Shrine,
yes,
under the icon of Mother
Mother
Mary. And
of Mother Mary.
there were Polish Catholic, also giving birth there. It was turned into a makeshift hospital. Everything had been bombed in Poland. So the monastery was turned into a makeshift hospital. And my mother was the only Jewish woman who was giving birth to a child. The others were Polish Catholic women. And they would say, oh, look, Żydówka, she's a Jewish woman. And as if, I sort of say in the book, as if she was coming back from the dead, which I say in a way she was. So my brother was really the only Jewish child to be born in that monastery. And he went back to visit them. Oh, I think it was about 30 years after his birth.
Incredible.
It was in the mid 70s. And many of the nuns remembered him because
Yeah.
they were like in their 20s or 30s or 40s at the time. So many of them are still alive. And he got a special tour by the Bishop of Częstochowa. It was a whole big deal. But yes, it's a very unusual story. And in my mind, and I think even my mother would say, she was looking down on us, so it was sort of interesting. Here we are, we're Jewish, but there was some kind of connection with, Virgin Mary, because my mother felt maybe my brother stayed alive because he was born because of that.
Yeah,
And
that's absolutely incredible because you don't really think too much about the Jewish experience in Europe during and after the Holocaust, with a Christian impact to that extent. But let's get you into Montreal. Your
good old
parents,
Montreal,
your
the
parents,
city of my heart.
your parents having heard about a pogrom, I
Yeah.
believe it was in southern Poland. They decide, okay, time for us to leave. We
Yeah.
got to get out of here.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
they
yeah.
made their way to Montreal because he had a sister who had gone there in 1926.
Sure.
And that
They didn't get there right away
not right away, right?
because they were in a DP, a displaced persons camp, for several years because the Canadian government was so anti-Semitic. William Lyon Mackenzie King, as
Yes.
you know, I mentioned it in the book. Two historians who were very well known in Toronto, Irving Abella, God rest his soul, and Hesh Troper, who wrote None is Too Many, which was, they unearthed letters and documents in Ottawa that between Charles Blair, who was the Minister of Immigration and Mines at the time, and the Prime Minister, Lyon Mackenzie King, saying, we will not allow any Jews into this country. This was before the war, during the war, even after the war. And that's interesting because my parents had to wait until 1948. My aunt, who came, as you say, in the 20s, she was a blood relative. She went to Ottawa many times trying to get her family out, even before the war. And no, 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 they were polite, but no. And the thing was that in 1948, something miraculous happened. William Lyon Mackenzie King stepped down as prime minister, and Louis Saint Laurent became prime minister, and he allowed the Jews in. And I say that because his name should be blessed.
Yeah, amen on that. Absolutely. And Mackenzie King's name should be cursed. Um,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. A
So
real,
you're born in Montreal,
yeah.
and your father was a very interesting man because
Oh,
he told you in Yiddish at some point he had decided that he wanted to live amongst the French Canadian, and he said in Yiddish to you, he said because they have more life. How did he say it in Yiddish?
he said it in Yiddish. Ich wot besser. Ich will besser wohnen
Mm.
mit den Franzosen und nicht mit den Engländer. The Franzosen haben a san Lebenkeit,
Right.
joie de vivre. He knew the word joie de vivre. He knew the meaning. He
Yeah.
said, Lebenkeit, ich will wohnen mit sei. So we were the only Jewish family to live on that street. And that was a great blessing for me because, my home was so filled, it was so bleak. And with my mother's emotional illness on top of everything else, it was just really awful. And here I was, this little girl, struggling to find a place. I wanted so much to be outside, out there with others. And that was considered, according to my mother, no, no, no. It's like, how dare you? All our relatives were murdered, and you want to be out there in the world. She could not get past that. And so, but I had these great French Canadian neighbors, and I would look at them, I would watch them and say, oh my God, yeah, they have a lot of Lebendigkeit. They have a lot of joie de vivre. I want to be like them.
Yeah.
And I became very good friends with one little French Canadian girl next door in the triplex next door to mine.
Francois.
Françoise,
Yeah.
yep, Françoise. And I would be invited to dinner, to supper at their place. And that's, by the way, when I first encountered on the wall in the kitchen a huge cross, a wooden cross with a man. And as a child, this was a man half naked with a gash in his rib.
Yes. Yes.
Then I realized I pieced it together and realized this was Le Seigneur. This was the Savior that they loved so much that most Christians thought the Jews had killed.
At the beginning of the book, when you wrote about your relationship with your little friend, Francoise, is that how we say it?
Françoise. Yeah.
It was both very, very happy, Grace, and very, very sad because, you went next door and the mother was a lovely woman, sort of a petite
Yeah.
little woman.
Yes.
And she served you and she saw the sadness in your
Yeah.
eyes. She saw the sadness in your life, but she really, really cared for you. And she was so
that's
lovely.
beautiful.
So yeah. So the sadness is you were coming from a home that was just very dark and bleak, but you
Yeah.
were going into this beautiful French Canadian home, which was full of life and full of celebration, right?
Yes, yes. And I felt it was a stolen pleasure,
Yeah.
really. Because obviously, in a sense, I felt, oh my God, I'm a traitor. I'm doing something wrong. Am I however, I thankfully somehow I reached out wherever I could to find the life force. And I don't know where that comes from, because not every child who went through what I went through would have been so focused on more life, get out there, whatever it takes, do it. I could have just fallen apart. I could have, who knows what. It didn't have to be this way. And I feel so grateful that whatever force, whatever, call it whatever you want, whatever cosmic force pushed me forward and said, keep going.
Mhm.
You are going to make it one day. You're going to be out there in that light.
Mhm.
And there was also, the great thing about Montreal, it's like a character in my book. The great thing too is that when I was a very young child, I would look through the window in winter, and that's why I the title is Winter Light, because Montreal, of course, is very cold,
Yeah.
and but very sunny. So the crystalline designs through the window, the Jack Frost designs were so beautiful. They were like, I would see them as valleys and rivers and mountains and towns. And I would say to myself, as like a little kid, I would say, I want to get there one day. I'm going to get to those places one day. And interestingly enough, I became a cultural anthropologist, an ethnographer, doing a lot of international work in all sorts of places. So it's interesting. Who knew?
So
But I
let me ask
want,
you this, just to get a better context of what you grew up with, because we all have, we all grow up in homes and we think this is it. This is how
yeah,
people live. I mean, we're little and we don't
yeah,
have any context really
right,
about
to
what's
know.
happening next door until we go next door. And I had a
Mhm.
similar situation in Kitchener. My father was a rabbi, so our home was very Orthodox. But down the street, I used to go to the Dunbar's house. They had 6 kids, and they were very waspy people, but very lovely people. And their lifestyle, especially at Christmas time, was
Oh
so
yeah.
different. And I embraced it, Grace. I
I
embraced
know
it.
the feeling. I
Well,
I
right,
as
you know
you
the
go
but what I'm curious about is your father, you said I really am my father's daughter. And you said
yeah.
he used to take you to the library and there would be particular books that he had voraciously would read. And then he would give you the children's book, but he would say, one day, Grace, you're going to read these books. Was your
That's right.
father the light then? Was he the light?
My father was the light. God rest his soul. Oh my God. I he's the one who held on to, in a sense, you see, my mother was, because of her illness, she was very tyrannical, and she could turn on a dime, so to speak. She could be okay one minute and then, I don't know, filled with rage, etc. And my father worshiped her. He really did love her, and he would have done anything for her. He would. So I was the outsider in the family, in the sense that for whatever reasons, my mother felt I was the real threat. My brother and my younger sister, I was in the middle. I don't know. It was maybe it probably was because I wanted to be out there so much and I wanted to do well. I had that whatever, that wherewithal. And my siblings not so much. So my mother focused on me trying to tamp me down. My father saw this. Now, unfortunately, he didn't stop her. I think he just, I don't know why, but he would take me away, to the library, to other places, and then we would be together, just the two of us. That's when he would share a
Wow.
lot of his
Mm,
loving
I see.
conversation. And I will never forget that first trip to the Gatineau Public Library with those books that you just mentioned, and the way he said, and one day you're going to read these big books. You're going to get, and he used the word an education,
Yes.
and you're going to become somebody. And so, he is the light in the sense that And here again, it's happy but sad, of course, as well. My father could have been a professor. He could have been a writer. He was such a great political analyst. He could always figure out I wish he were here today, because look at what the world is like at the moment. He had this amazing sense of political acumen. And it's sad that he did not have the opportunity. And in a way, I think I am doing it for him.
That's lovely.
I am living his dream. And it's good, but I feel very sorrowful that he could not reach that dream, and it had to wait.
What did he do for a living in Montreal, Grace?
Well, he was, a bookkeeper in factories and so on. Nothing, and especially for a man who really had, and I'm not saying this because he's my father, he really was very intellectual, and yet he couldn't use it. And so it must have been a double slap in the face, so to speak, that here he was, this immigrant, this refugee, this Holocaust survivor, working, piecemeal, some bookkeeping here, some bookkeeping there. And I think he knew what his potential was, and he knew that he could never reach it. And that I have his sorrow within me. I really do. But at least, hopefully, he's up there quelling. Maybe he's up there schepping nachas, that at least I am doing what he would have loved to have done.
I'm sure that he is, because you have a lovely spirit. This is the first time that I've ever met you, but you're just full of exuberance. And that has to come from somewhere. And you've also pursued your own personal passion. That can only happen when you have light inside of you. But I want to ask you a particular question having to do with that.
Oh.
You talk about the book as being, or your history as being a series of rescues. And I found that a very, very interesting term. Kirkus calls Winterlight very powerful and deeply human. And when you hear that kind of praise, what part of your own story feels more vulnerable to share? But yet, why did you decide to share it anyway?
That's a good question. I didn't expect to write this memoir at all. Mm-hmm. I have written academic books, as you mentioned, and I love teaching my graduate courses. I loved it. My career was the greatest gift I received professionally. I feel really fortunate for all of it. I never, ever, ever thought I would write this memoir. Yes. But what happened was, and here's how the professional and the personal come together sometimes. I taught a course. My courses, I created my own graduate courses. I was very lucky. I had a great chair of my department who I guess saw what I could do and allowed me to run with it. Yeah. I brought in a lot of students into my department. And so there was one course called Language, Culture, and Identity, which was based on subjective ethnographic work. It was a new methodology called narrative inquiry. At that time, we're talking the mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s. That was the beginning of that methodology, and that was the beginning of my university career. I was an elementary school teacher before that. That was a detour. That's a whole other story. But so the notion is that when you are a researcher, Margaret Mead, Franz Boas, the more traditional anthropologists say you should not, as a researcher, share your personal stories, because that might dilute or affect the documents, the data that you gather. But Clifford Geertz, who I am so fortunate to know, he passed away, but he was at Princeton, and he was sort of my mentor. I asked him, because when I started doing my field work in the Jewish Arab village in Israel, Neve Shalom, Chat al Salam, they began to share their stories, but they wanted to know my story. Like, why? Why am I interested? To know the pain, the sorrow, the hate, the hopes they have. And I called up Clifford at that moment and I said, "Oh my God, am I going to be breaking a horrible rule if I include my story?" He said, "No, you know that's what I broke the rule already. You can do it." He did that in the 50s with his research work because his point was, and I totally agree, the researcher, either consciously or unconsciously, is sharing their story, whether they realize it or not. It affects what they end up researching and how they interpret their data. So the point is, you're not being truthful in a sense if you don't include your story, because it is affecting everything that you do. So be upfront about it. And so I was teaching that course about just what I was saying, autoethnography, narrative inquiry. And so my students, as work, as different kinds of homework that they had to do, in a sense, they began to include their stories. And then we had conversations, and I began to tell them my story, finally. Up until then, I never talked about being a child of survivors, nothing. It was too painful. Yeah. But I felt very safe in my classrooms. And they began to tell me, my students began to say, "Grace, one of these days, you're going to have to write your story and publish it and get it out there." And I said, "Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so. Professor Feuerverger, you have to do it. Yes. And when you do it, let us know." And guess what? That stayed in my mind. And then when I was close to retirement, which was not that long ago, it's just before COVID, actually. I didn't know COVID would happen. Then suddenly there was COVID. I had a lot of time. I began to write furiously. Yes. And that's how it happened. And I got into, and my students, my grad students, so many for many, many years would get in touch with me. "I saw that you published your memoir. Congratulations. I've got it. I'm sharing it." It's amazing. It's such a gift, such an amazing gift.
I think part of that gift, there are many gifts when you publish a book, for depending on the person who's writing it. But in your case, you are keeping your parents' spirit alive as well.
Ah, that's right? So beautiful. That's so beautiful.
I believe so. And the way you write about your mom and dad, that is very beautiful. You were very blessed to have special parents. And yeah. I just think that when people buy your book and they read it, they'll be really taken by your history and all these series of rescues that you talk about. There's definitely an adventure that one goes through.
I want to say that one rescue, my parents for sure, we're the foundation, needless to say, but there is one great, well, two really, but one great serendipitous rescue that happened after I graduated from McGill. I met a guy who ended up being my husband, who is still my husband after many decades.
In San Francisco, right?
Yeah, I met him in Berkeley.
Yeah, right.
I'm here in Berkeley right now.
Okay. Okay.
I've done a lot of research work here in Berkeley as well as University of Toronto. But Berkeley is like, it's where we met. So whenever we're here, we feel like we're young students again. Yeah. He's a mathematician, and he was doing his PhD. I'm younger, so I was just just after my bachelor's degree. But he's also a child of Holocaust survivors, by the way.
Right.
And we had that bond, and we have saved each other's lives over and over again. I really mean that. And I'm not even sure if I could have reached, wherever I am right now without him. We needed each other to go forward. He needed me too. And
Grace, you have a very special soul. And
wow.
And why I embrace that is not only because I have the opportunity to meet you and to do this interview, but there's a certain, I hope you don't mind if I swear here, but there's a certain fuck you to Hitler here, And the fact of the matter is your parents came from Częstochowa, they went to Montreal, Your father saw his own personal light there and he passed it on to you. Unfortunately, your mother had challenges, but one can only think that having a daughter like you with such a vivacious spirit, that in itself must have really carried her in some ways, you know? And I
I
really
think
believe that from my heart. I really believe.
oh, that's so beautiful. That's
Thank you.
so beautiful. And I'm sure if she's probably listening, I hope
Yes.
she probably would say, yeah, although unfortunately she couldn't, express it in the way that would have been helpful to me as a
Yes.
child.
Yes.
But now as an adult, of course I understand. And I went through I found my second serendipitous rescue is I found a great therapist in Toronto.
Yes.
And he was able to help me unravel the problems that my mother had. Once I was able to really understand her suffering, that liberated me,
Correct. Yes.
and at that point, even though she wasn't alive anymore, I could understand and go forward and understand that, well, she had I mean, what a life she had. Horrifying, horrifying. I understand how she couldn't even imagine the life that I ended up having. And that's, I feel great sorrow for that as well. I mean, not just for my father, but my poor mother, who was very vivacious. I get that from her, by the way.
Good word. Vivacious.
She was I mean, this is interesting. At home, when she fell into, very negative black moods, she'd be someone. But when she was outside, she tried so hard. She had tremendous vivacity. I mean, wow, amazing. I have to say, in a way, I have her personality.
Yes.
And fortunately, I don't have her emotional. I was able to deal with that. And I thankfully don't have her emotional problems. And of course, I didn't live the terrible life she lived.
Well, God bless her soul.
God bless her soul.
I want to do what I've been doing for the last few months. At the end of my interviews, I had AI create poems about my guests. So I have a guest which is called Winterlight, a poem for Grace Feuerverger.
Yeah,
Sorry, you have the most
that's good.
complex
It's
name
good.
of any guest I've ever had. Welcome, welcome the voice that kindles lamps in memory. Grace, scholar of spirit. Born in Montreal, where languages braid the air and words become passports. Her parents carried winter in their coats. Her father, welder of survival, stitched life back together in the camps, once pulling her mother from a line of ending a single act of defiance against history's machinery. Do not judge a person as one, he taught, holding mercy like a fragile flame. Their home held shadows, so the child stepped outward into French laughter, into strangers who did not know they were saving her. She learned that language can be shelter, that culture can be light. Across cities, Berkeley, Jerusalem, Perugia, Toronto, she gathered voices the way dawn gathers color. She taught that identity is a crossing, that peace is a verb, that dignity is learned by listening. Her books became lanterns, but Winter Light is the quietest flame, a memoir of inherited darkness and the stubborn radiance that survives it. Grace walks still between grief and gratitude, carrying brightness in her hands. Some voices do not merely tell a story, they prove that even if after history's coldest season, the human soul remembers how to thaw.
Oh my gosh,
You
that
love it?
is so
You love it?
beautiful.
It's beautiful, isn't it? I
Oh
know.
my gosh.
I'll send
Whew,
it to you. I'll send it to you. Grace,
thank
can
you.
I ask you a favor? Can we stay in touch?
Yes,
I
please.
like you.
I like you. And
Thank
I
you.
will be back in Toronto in the spring, later in the spring. Absolutely.
I,
You live.
I I give you a big embrace for what you have accomplished, not only as a little girl growing up and searching for the light and finding it, but later on as an ethnographer. And I'm sure the impact that you've had on your students must have been absolutely brilliant because you're
I love,
having a great influence on me right now. So
wow.
thank you for that. Where is your book available?
The book can be found, you can order it in any bookstore or, of course, Amazon or bookshop.org, any of these online places as well as your favorite bookstore. But Amazon, of course, I hate to say that, but Amazon is the fastest approach.
Yes.
And yeah, and I would so love to hear from people as to how they feel after they have read the book. I've gotten some amazing responses from the audiences where I've given a lot of talks in churches, in synagogues, in literary venues in many parts of the world, as in US and Canada, but also in London, UK, at the Wiener Holocaust Library, and Yad Vashem. I've been very fortunate. And also in a monastery, the Latrun Monastery near Jerusalem. I have a beautiful picture of the one of the monks holding my book, and I'm standing next to him.
Very cool. That's great. Grace,
Yeah.
I want to thank you again for being my guest. And I would,
Thank you,
absolutely, I would advise everybody to pick up the book because it's a wonderful, wonderful read. And it gives people an insight into the life of a little girl who came from a lot of darkness, but still managed to find the hope. Until we meet again, folks. Yes.
I just wanted to say one thing. And one of the reasons that I ended up keep going, writing the book, it was very painful, but I wanted to lend voice to those children of survivors who can't write their story because it's too painful. I sort of feel like I'm writing for them as well.
Good.
And I want to say that. I really do want to say it. I didn't want to
children coming from trauma. Ladies and gentlemen, as my mother used to say, God bless her soul, sei gesund.
Sei gesund and stark.
And stark and go in good health. Until we meet again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Grace.